one that's in the Garden of Eden has been going to be reaccessed one day. Do I need to quit moving around? I saw Thaddeus jump up and grab the camera. He's trying to do some kind of, so I think it's the edge of this pew to the edge of this pew. Is that right? Okay. Yeah, okay, that's good. I'll stay there. Bring him in. When you think of the story and how God has shown His love and His power and His majesty, as I told you last week, I'm having a tough time skipping parts. You notice that with the lesson with Genesis as we look through and move through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You can't miss those three. That's a big part of the story. Well, the next individual in line with the story is a man by the name of Moses. And man, ask Bert. Last week, we were just blessed with a look at the book of Exodus. And there is no way in 30 minutes I can move all the way through Exodus. So I picked a moment in Exodus that I think signifies a significant part of the story. The title, the thought, I stole from Brother Dan, who was speaking in chapel each day about 9 o'clock. And Dan each day was looking at one of the questions in Exodus. There's 4 significant questions. I want to look at the one that Moses asks in chapter 3. And we're going to read a section of that text here, verses 1 through 11. And then I'll introduce some further thoughts. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of the bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses, here I am. Then he said, do not draw near the place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father. And notice, he identifies himself, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. Perfect song, Joe. My Jesus knows. And it was pitched right. So I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. A lot of sights that they were going to get to be in and see. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me. I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come now therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Amen. But Moses said to God, who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? That's a great question. Who am I? Moses has been in the wilderness for 40 years. And if you remember, I don't know if you saw the movie, but you've read the book, you've read the story, The Prince of Egypt. For 40 years, Moses was there. Vince Lombardi, one time in talking to some of the assistant coaches that he had drawn near him, he gave this quote. He said, you will be fired up with enthusiasm, or you will be fired with enthusiasm. Moses, in the middle of enthusiasm is us. And when you look, who am I? That's a great question. Moses is here in the wilderness. For 40 years, he was somebody. Remember, his mother hid him. The daughter of the Pharaoh comes, takes him. He's raised for 40 years in the palace. In fact, most likely not the next in line. It would have been the actual son of it, but he would have been somewhere in a power setting until he chose early in Exodus. That's when we find out that he takes the life of an Egyptian who's mistreating a fellow Hebrew. So he runs out of the wilderness. Well, for 40 years, he's nobody. He's just a sheep herder out in the wilderness. 40 years, he's nobody. Well, here in Exodus chapter 3, Moses meets the somebody who can make somebody out of nobody. Who am I? Moses goes, you want me to go back? Because you know all the thoughts we've tried to guess, and you know we're not going to look through the list. And we'll take this in a totally different direction than where you might think we're going with this. Because when we're trying to get our identity, when we're trying to figure out who we are, a lot of that has to do with our experiences. A lot of that has to do with who we think we are and who we're around and who we spend our time with. And see, there are four major groups of people in Jesus' day. We're going to go full forward. Look with me in Mark chapter 12. And I hope this kind of resonates or makes sense over in Mark 12, because when you come to Mark 12, Jesus encounters a group of individuals who think they are somebody. They're the individuals in Jesus' day who would not be in the same category as Moses was this day, because Moses is in a place in his life where he thinks, I am useful to no one. I'm just a sheep herder out here taking care of in Midian, taking care of my father-in-law's sheep, married to his daughter. I'm as far away from God as I have ever been, and all of a sudden God shows up and gives me a challenge. Who am I? So with that thought process in mind, read with me Mark 12, verse 13 through 31. A little lengthy reading, but I want you to get the full context. Seeing from afar off the fig tree leaves. I'm reading the wrong one. It makes no sense to me where I wanted to be. Then he sent to him some of the Pharisees and the Herodians to catch him in his words. When they came, they said to him, Teacher, we know that you are true and care about no one, for you do not regard the person of men, but teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Shall we pay or shall we not pay? But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said to them, Why do you test me? Bring me a denarius that I may see it. So they brought it, and he said to them, Whose image and inscription is this? They said to him, Caesar's. Jesus answered and said to them, Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. Then some Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus and asked him, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote to us that if a man's brother dies and he leaves his wife behind and leaves no children, his brother should take his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. Can't you hear somebody creating this scenario? How many of you ever heard Brother Dr. Sam Hester did during one of the entertainment venues at the Jerusalem? Anybody remember hearing that, the story, somebody getting all the stories of the Bible mixed up? Jerusalem? You haven't heard that? I'll have to share that with you sometime. That's kind of what it sounds like here. There's God, lady, and then 7 brothers married. Last of all, the woman died with no offspring. In the resurrection, when they rise, whose wife will she be? For all 7 had her as a wife. Jesus answered and said to them, and I don't fully understand all of what Jesus is talking about, but I love the way he answers. Are you not therefore mistaken because you do not know the Scriptures nor the power of God? For when they rise from the dead, they shall neither marry nor give in marriage. They're like the angels in heaven. But concerning the dead that they rise, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the burning bush passage, how God spoke to him saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. You are therefore greatly mistaken. Do you hear what Jesus just said? I'm the God of the living, Abraham. The God of the living Isaac. The God of the living Jacob. They're not dead, they're asleep. That's forever been changed. And even at the moment that God says that to Moses by the burning bush, as Jesus refers back to this very moment, then one of the scribes came, and having heard him. Do you see the picture here? You got the Herodians, you got the Sadducees, and now you got the scribes. Everybody trying to catch Jesus. One of the scribes came, and having heard him reasoning together, perceiving that he had answered them well, asked him, which is the first commandment of all? Jesus answered him, the first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And hear the song of Moses. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment. And the second like it is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So the scribe said to him, well said, teacher, you have spoken the truth. For there is one God, and there is no other but He. And to love Him with all the heart, with all the understanding, with all the soul, with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself is more than all burnt offerings and sacrifices. And this is Jesus' way of saying amen. You are not far from the kingdom of God. Who am I? Well, let's look at a quick list of the folks that were there in this moment as he reflects back on that moment. Because you got Moses standing there at the burning bush going, who am I? You got the Pharisees that show up who are the radically right. In fact, that's their significant question. Is it right? And that's a great question. It's not a bad question. The downside is that better not be the only question that you ask. You can get so caught up in being right that you're convincing yourself, who am I? I'm the one that's right. I'm the one that's figured it out. I know all the answers. Have you ever thought to yourself, why in the world did it take 80 years before God showed up at the burning bush with Moses and introduced Himself? Joe and I were kidding each other back in the lobby. We were talking about the fact that we don't feel, he said 60, and I said, I don't feel 57. I'm not sure what that's supposed to feel like. I shared with some of you the other night when we were over and playing basketball with Graham, and all of his buddies were over there, and me. All his buddies and me. I emphasized that part. And the guys are coming up to me, Mr. Sams, I hope when I'm at your age that I can still get on the court. You know, you don't feel old to those kind of moments when you're going, look at it. I don't know what, Joe was guessing what, late 40s? I'm thinking maybe, somewhere there too, maybe early 40s, where I feel like. But at 80 years of age, Moses shows up. And for 40 years, he knew who he was. And then for 40 more years, he's out. Now, I'm not pleased. I know some of you are going to come out, what's wrong with shepherds? I mean, shepherding's a good job. It's an enjoyable. It's at the end. You work sun up to sundown. You come home, you're tired. You sleep well and you rest. You don't have any concerns because the sheep are in the fold. Everybody's good. But why do you come? Does God come to you and say, I want you? It might just be that God can only use us when we realize we're nobody in His presence. And that's what happens to the Pharisees. I've said this before, I'll say it publicly again. I do not want to be a Pharisee. But there is such a strong desire in me to be right. Anybody else other than me wrestle with that? I mean, that's I want to be right. I was raised by a father, and my whole mindset is I want to know what God wants me to do, and I want to try to figure that out. And to the best of my ability, I want to accomplish that. That's why I wrestle so much with a lot of the things we share with folks, and why we look around Sunday, almost we're full up on Sunday morning, Sunday night. I wrestle with that as a minister. The elders wrestle with that, and we're, and I know part of being right is doing right things, and some of that is being at the right place, but I think we have to be so careful sometimes not to be so caught up in being right that we analyze others by our rightness and not God's righteousness. And there's a difference in those two. God's the only one who knows. Who am I to determine that for somebody else? Next group shows up are the Herodians. Don't know a lot about them. But when they're questioning, the Herodians are the one that came up, and it was about the money. And they brought the coin and said, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Jesus answered in a very apt way. He said, whose picture's on the coin? Caesar, Caesar, God, God's. It's a question will come up later. But it's not, the question here is it not just is it right, but is it lawful? And wanting to make sure that everything is done in a proper way, and that is absolutely a great concept. It's not a bad thought process. We unfortunately live in a world where individuals don't think there are any lines, that there aren't any things that are right and wrong. And it just depends on how you feel, or what your experiences are, or what your particular desires are. And that's what determines what you want or what you need. And that God knows that about you, and He's going to be... There are things that are lawful, there are things that are unlawful. And the Herodians, as they approached Jesus in this case, who am I? I'm the person that's going to make sure you do exactly like I'm supposed to do. What's that mean? Well, okay, I'll confess another weakness to you. I'm the guy where I'm traveling down the road trying the best of my ability to do speed limit. Somebody passes me, I think about maybe them getting caught. I'm sure that doesn't bother y'all. Somebody's whizzing through traffic, kind of driving a little reckless, and you're going, man, where's the officer when you need one? I yet have had that experience when that's happened to me, and down the road see that person was pulled behind, but I'm afraid I'm just praying that my reaction wouldn't be what I think it might be. See, that's Herodian. That's Herodian. Told you. Hoped that you'd get what you deserved. Until it's us in the deserving place. Justice, mercy, or grace, which one do you want? Depends where you are. Depends where you are. Thirdly, and we really get nervous with these guys. These are the Sadducees. I love the song we sing at camp. I don't want to be a Pharisee because it's always living in a heresy. I don't want to be a Sadducee because they're sad. You know why they're sad? There's no resurrection. Don't believe in angels. Don't believe in the Spirit. It's all what I can see, feel, hear, experience. It's what's real. Show it to me. These are the folks, I think I even mentioned it last time. They're from Missouri. Sadducees got to feel it, see it, taste it, touch it, hear it. It's got to be real. It can't be, if it's anything spiritual or something they can't explain, nope, don't want any part of that. Holy Spirit, no way. God in the flesh, no. No, couldn't happen. The Sadducees had no future. But they were part of the established group of individuals that were going, well, but I feel very strongly about this because it's just something that's real to me. And there's no evidence of resurrection. I don't know what the Sadducees did with Jairus' daughter being. I don't know what the Sadducees did with Lazarus showing back up in Bethany. I don't know how they reasoned that. I don't know how they figured it out. They may have been the same kind of, well, he wasn't really dead. Whatever, trying to figure that out, because the Sadducees said, I've got to see it and know it. I've got to be convinced. It's got to be, they're in a very scientific mindset. it's a really dangerous. Who am I? I'm the person I got to know. I got to have the facts. Again, anything wrong with that? You do this. This is no. Anything wrong with that? No. The downside is when you don't accept something that's just as real, because if that is your approach to Christianity or to God, I've got to see it to believe it, you will never see Him. Some of you are going, what are you saying? I'm saying you're talking about the God who in Hebrews says, seeing the unseen. Him who the writer in Hebrews also said, He formed the world out of nothing. When you start taking those stretches and those steps, you go, what? Who am I? Don't get it. Then you come to the last group. These are the individuals who spent their days. These are what you call the book, chapter, and verse guys. What is happening? I don't think I'm doing anything. Maybe walking in static electricity. That may be what it is. These are the individuals that copied the Old Testament, letter for letter, word for word, jot for jot, just making sure every line by line and making sure copying. They were the ones that you said something, yeah, that's located, and they could give you the exact location, the exact wording, the phraseology by the letter. I know what the book says. Because if you remember, they were the ones that came. The scribe was the one that waited. They're wise individuals because they've read it and they know it. And they waited. They let the Pharisees and the Herodians and the Sadducees kind of, Jesus take them to task. And if you'll note, it said the scribe noticed that he answered correctly. Because Jesus always went back to the book. Scribes knew that. In fact, if you'll notice in Acts, there are at least 3 times, if I remember, Darrell, check me on this, but at least 3 times that some of those who were converted were the scribes. Because if you can show someone that's reading it and it comes straight from the book, and you can prove that, they're going to go, hey, there's nothing wrong with being by the book. But Paul wrote a letter to a church and said, sometimes the letter can kill without the Spirit. Because I've always wondered of all of these groups, when you look at the Pharisees, the Herodians, the scribes, the Sadducees, and the Zealots, we could have included some other individuals, and you ask yourself, okay, where am I in this spectrum of what I've got to see, know, feel very strongly about, or some kind of legal, is it right, is it lawful, is it good, is it real? What is my question? Who am I? Some of it comes down to how I treat my fellow man. Romans 15, Galatians 6. In fact, look over at Galatians 6. Opening verses here. Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you are spiritual. Restore such a one in spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. See, any one of these individuals would have been ready to correct anybody else. They wanted to correct Jesus. That's why they analyzed him. And that's why when you've got Moses at the burning bush and God asked him this significant question, I'm going to send you. And Moses says, who am I? What would have happened, just perchance, if when God said, I want you to go tell Pharaoh, if Moses had said, I'm your man. You come to the right place. I've been wanting to go back to Egypt. In fact, I took one of those Egyptians out. Why didn't mine? Let's just go take care of Pharaoh too. Why didn't God call him when he was 40, when he was ready? He had all that energy. He had all that passion. Sometimes passion has to be tempered. Don't mishear me. Sometimes I think we are passionless. We don't have anything we feel strong about. You got to give credit to the Pharisees, the Zealots, the Herodians, the Sadducees. They knew who they were. Now, was that the exact right person they need to be? Not necessarily before God. Because before you can be effective for God, you don't have to really know as much of who you are. And we're going to get to that in just a minute. He says, bear one another's burdens, so fulfill what? The law of Christ. Now, don't mishear me here. I'm not saying that doesn't mean that the other legal ramifications of the law aren't important. He's not saying that. He's not saying it's not important to keep the Ten Commandments at that time. And remember, even to keep the Sabbath, remember the Sabbath, to keep it holy, for us to be still praise God and love Him and focus a day on Him at least a day. But he's saying the commandments, the law hangs on our... If you look at the Ten Commandments, they're about a relationship with God and a relationship with each other. I'm not supposed to take your stuff, treat you in any bad way, and I'm supposed to worship and reverence God. That's the law, which is summed up in, bear one another's burdens, so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks himself to be something, when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone, not in another. For each one shall bear his own burdens. Let him who is taught the word share in all things with him who teaches. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever man sows, that will he also reap. For if he sows to his flesh, will of the flesh reap corruption. But who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap life everlasting. Let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Doesn't matter if it's 40 years, doesn't matter if it's 80 years. How about 120 when he gets to the edge of Canaan? Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are the household of faith. So what's the thought? Well, it kind of starts at this. One purpose. Moses was in the right place in the story for God to see him walk up and catch him at the bush when he was ready to do God's will. Not mine. See, there's the blocker with the Herodians, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. I want to do it my way. It took God 80 years to get Moses to the point that he said, who am I? Because then Jesus could say, or God could say, see, we don't get that till we get out of our own selves. We don't understand it. We don't realize it. We don't appreciate it. We're not ready to accept that. When you think of when Moses came to him and he said, what am I supposed to tell him to send me? Moses, I am. That I am. Moses, it's not you going into Egypt to bring my people home. It's me through you. See, the story is God will use us when He meets us at the place when we're ready to listen. Again, on a Sunday night, I think I'm singing to the choir. You're here. My prayer through this whole journey of the one story is that we can see moment after moment after moment that God uses individuals to His glory when they're ready to be used by Him. That's my prayer for us tonight and you. I want you to ask yourself, am I ready for God to show up so that I can say, who am I, Lord? What do you need me to do? What do you need me to do? See, the story that follows this is amazing. As they walk out of Egypt free, because God still can do everything He's ever been able to do. I don't know where you are tonight in your own relationship, but I want you to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God knows where you are and He's willing to come to you and to be available and to help and to consider. He will provide the peace. He'll provide the answers. He'll provide. That's what happens in this story as it moves forward. You know, the next question he asks Moses, what's in your hand? He's just got a staff in his hand. That's what Moses thought it was, till he threw it down and had the courage to pick it back up. It's amazing. So where are you tonight? We can help in any way. If there's something you need to share, if you need to start the journey to be a part of the story of God by penitent faith, confession, and baptism, that's why we have this song in this moment. Would you come while we stand and sing?